God, we're going to have like 6 introductions, and then we're going to take a break. Tucson again. I mean, it's fantastic. It's great being here. The one thing that is nice about this event every year is that people come down here to see and to buy and to participate. But it is over the years developed into just like it's an energetic thing, ideas and thoughts and what's happening in the industry. And if I were to, I worked with some high school kids the other day and talking about, you want to understand the colored gemstone and pearl industry? Spend a few days in Tucson. While you're here, you're going to do it. One of the driving considerations in our business today, as in many businesses, is how our customers feel about our product, how our product is perceived by the public. You can wrap a lot of names around it: sustainability, market chain, corporate social responsibility. It's something that every industry is looking to improve, and certainly it's something that's important for our industry. Bless you. I've been to 16 different meetings, and I'm sure some of you have, about different initiatives and different groups and things. And one of the things that we benefit from is the GemHub that Dr. Cartier is going to explain to you, which is the kind of the host of this event here. Simply put, it's a knowledge hub. That's just what it sounds like. What's taking place out there? What's good? What's bad? What's being done? And someplace that we can compile these things and work together. And for today's talk, we brought in some renowned, famous people to talk to you about, when it comes to sustainability, what do I do? I mean, some of these guys need no introduction, but, Dr. Cartier is going to introduce them anyway. So I just wanted to welcome you and thank you and tell you that keep an eye on this group and keep an eye on what's taking place, because it's going to be very important for us as we move forward with these different initiatives and different things. We benefit ourselves. I'm not sure if you know, AGTA is going to be in Jaipur at the end of the month, and we're working on baseline monitoring and testing and protocols for the abatement of silicosis in the gem cutting field, and we were benefited from a grant from the GemHub on that, and we'll be working with them in country. So if you want more information about that, come see us or grab Dr. Cartier or someone else. Bruce was like the driving force behind that. So that's a tangible thing that we're doing, and these guys can talk to you about more things they do, and Laurent Cartier will talk to you about the GemHub. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug, for the kind introduction. I'd like to introduce our panelists today. So first of all, Bruce Bridges, who is a renowned gemstone miner and dealer specialized in stones from East Africa, such as Tsavorite. He's also he's on the board of AGTA and on the board of ICA, so is very knowledgeable about the industry in general. Alan Hart, who is CEO of GemA, the oldest gemological education institution in the world. And he used to be the curator at the Natural History Museum in London. Dr. Jeff Post, who is chief curator of the Earth Sciences Collection at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., which is one of the world's premier gem collections. The world's premier, sorry. Thank you, Doug. So also very important in terms of gemological research, education, and outreach. And then Shelley Sargent, who is curator of Summer on the Rainbow collection, which is a collection of jewelry and fine gemstones which tours and educates people about gemstones around the world. So I'd like to have our panelists come up. You can sit here at the table. There's four chairs. And I think the aim of today's event, as Doug already said, is for this to be more of a discussion rather than PowerPoint presentations or things like that. A discussion about what can the gemstone industry do to contribute to sustainable development? And in that context, I also wanted to briefly introduce the Gemstones and Sustainable Development Knowledge Hub that Doug mentioned. It's called GemHub. The website is www.sustainablegemstones.org. It is an initiative that started last year between 3 universities, which is the University of Delaware, the University of Queensland in Australia, and the University of Lausanne in Switzerland, with the idea of bringing together all the existing knowledge and initiatives that are happening in this field. So people, be it traders or consumers, are crying out for information and knowledge on how gemstones are produced, how they are manufactured, how they are sold. And a lot of these sustainability or ethical questions, well, it's difficult to answer them. The gemstone industry is very complex, very fragmented. And the aim of this discussion today, and we really welcome questions and also examples from you as participants in this, is to talk about, well, how can the gemstone industry further contribute to sustainable development? There's huge potential for gemstones to contribute to poverty alleviation. Gemstones are also very low impact when you compare that to metals mining or other extractive industries. So there's a lot of potential there. But the issues are complex. So how do we get to that next level? As Doug mentioned, how do we get to a level where consumers feel comfortable about buying gemstones and knowing the story of where the gemstones come from? So I'd like to begin and ask all 4 of you maybe your perspective on that. Maybe also your experience. Some of you are more from a museum background or educational background. What answers can we give to that? And especially, what are the training and research needs of the industry? That's what we're most interested in. What are the questions that need to be answered so that we can move these things forward? And perhaps, Shelley, you could begin from your experience with consumers or educating people on what their questions are and how we could go about answering some of those questions.
Well, first, good morning, and thank you all so much for being here so bright and early.
Thank you.
Next time, we do this at noon. So thank you so much for being here. My background, for those of you who don't know me, I actually come from a retail background. And so I've been able to see the industry from a retail perspective and then going into the educational perspective and into the exhibit perspective. So I have a little different view, I guess, on this. Originally, when I started in the business, no one asked where the gemstones came from. No one really cared. All they knew is that they found something that they loved and they wanted to buy it. Obviously, the world is changing and we're becoming a much more transparent world. So for us at Somewhere in the Rainbow, it's really important when we're acquiring any gem that we try and trace it as close to the mine, as close to where it came out of the ground as absolutely possible. We like to know who the cutters are. We like to catalog that information, and then we like to take that information forward. And so even being a professional in that business, I'm curious to know of origins and cutters and designers. So obviously the public is also interested. And as we continue to take that message forward and we're starting to answer those questions for people, I think that it's becoming a place of transparency. And the more transparent we all are, the more we're all going to benefit.
Okay. Bruce, what would be your perspective on this? I'd be especially interested to hear what your perspective is as a miner and dealer coming from industry.
Surely. Well, thank you once again, everybody, for being here, especially so early in the morning. And thank you for the question, Laurent. I think inherently, just to get it out of the way, gemstone mining is not sustainable in the long run as you're dealing with a finite resource. So with that being said, the big question when gemstone mining is really how you can ameliorate any disturbance to the environment that you do, as well as aid the local communities in which you mine as well as possible. And a great amount of people have their livelihood in gemstone mining in these countries of origin. My area of expertise is indeed East Africa, so Kenya and Tanzania. And with that being said, there's a large percentage of the populace in southern Kenya and in northern Tanzania that do depend on gemstone mining. That being said, anytime one is mining a gemstone, you have to disturb the environment. There's no way around that. So you say to yourself, well, how can I be the best shepherd that I can in this environment? And a few things that we do. My father was always a very staunch environmentalist. Many of these locations, these gem mining locations, are in very remote areas where you have wild animals, and you want to try and look after your animals. We would have anti-poaching units where we would use our security forces, go around, check for traps, check for snares. If there were any animals, try to free the animals. If not, be in touch with KWS, Kenya Wildlife Service. We work with them extremely closely, especially on elephant poaching, as Tsavo in Kenya, southern Kenya, is very famous for its elephants. And we would work directly with Kenya Wildlife Service on elephant poaching in particular. On top of that, though, if you go to many mines, you'll see huge mine dumps. One thing that we did is we would tunnel as soon as possible, as opposed to open cast mining, where open cast mining you're using exponentially more earth, removing exponentially more earth from the ground, and tunneling is far more surgical. On top of that, instead of creating mine dumps, we would spread the waste rock over vast expanses, actually on our airstrip. And interestingly enough, as the host rock oxidizes, it breaks down into the soil. So if you visit our mine, you won't see any large mine dumps. We also would plant trees to replace any that were removed and actually add to the area. We use water catchment systems of rainwater, even though we are in a semi-arid region. So there are indeed things that you can do. All of our employees, we have full accident insurance, and we give full medical care to all of our employees. That being said, one thing that is also, I think, overlooked in many of these countries is actually the government itself. And as good a job as any private organization or company might try to do, one also has to look at the governments in these countries. Are they supporting the industry? Are they supporting investment, both foreign and local? And with that being said, it is a very large picture that we all need to look at. For me personally, I'm very happy that the industry is putting more of a focus on sustainability, at least sustainability as far as we can be in a finite industry. And that being said, I would also like to see perhaps more focus put on governments in these countries of origin as well, and to pressure them to have more care in the industries, because I think that's a largely overlooked factor here.
Thank you, Bruce. And I think, as many of you might hear, the issues are complex. The issues are complex, and the problem also with saying, are gemstones sustainable or not? The question, as Bruce mentioned, is, well, it's finite. So can the gemstones actually be invested in something more long-term, locally? Poverty alleviation, and also for the environment. It's about going to the next level. And even if it's finite, it can still contribute to sustainable development. Maybe, Jeff, you can offer your perspective as a researcher, educator, and doing a lot of outreach with the public, and probably facing some of these questions as well in sourcing of your gems and minerals.
Yeah, good morning. I'm coming into this from perhaps a slightly different perspective, being at the Smithsonian. We deal a lot with the public perception of what we put on exhibition, the work that we do. And so we're always looking for ways to try to understand what the public knows, what they don't know, what they're expecting, what they want to learn from us. And it was really interesting to me when it seems not so long ago, but now it's been 20 years ago, but we built our new gem exhibit, and we've done some upgrades since then. And so we continue to put out, to do work with focus groups and surveys. And the very basic question that we often will ask people is, so where do gems come from? And it's really disheartening to find out how many people don't immediately know the answer to that question. And after you kind of poke and prod at them a little bit and get them thinking about it, eventually they kind of get there. But most of the time when people see a gemstone, the context, the first time most people have ever seen a ruby, a sapphire, a diamond, an emerald is in a jewelry store, or they've seen it maybe in one of our exhibitions somewhere. And that's the only context they have for what these things are. And so to get beyond that context and try to think about more where they came from and what their stories are, that takes some doing. And so that is what starts to guide our thinking in terms of our exhibition stories we want to tell. And obviously, to get to think about even things like sustainability, you've got to get people thinking about where do these things come from and what they really are. And so we consider it a huge victory if people have come through our exhibitions, and at the end we do surveys and ask them, where did this what's a gem and where does it come from? They can tell us that they in fact were cut from mineral crystals that came out of the earth. I mean, that's a pretty exciting result for us. But realizing we're so immersed into it. I mean, I'm a research scientist in geology, and so these things are my life. But for most people that occasionally buy them or occasionally intersect with them, they don't have that sense of context at all of where they come from. And then the other part of what they might know or might learn is, again, what they read in the newspaper, the press, where there's some connection maybe then to gems and mining, and there's sort of this sense of mining is just kind of bad, it's hurting the earth, whatever. And that becomes a bit of a negative context, which again, we try to address by providing a much bigger picture of the whole story of how these things come out of the earth and, what the benefits are and how how they form, and each one is interesting and has its own story in some way. And so it's a big issue, but I think, before you can talk about sort of some of the issues today, realizing that most people are starting at the very beginning. I think you don't want to underestimate where you have to start sometimes to really start to get people thinking about the story. One other comment I'll make is just this, in the last spring, I was with a group, we went to Sri Lanka. And this was, I'm unlike Bruce, a lot of others, I've not spent my life doing mining, things like that. I mean, I've been in a lot of mines as a geologist, but going to Sri Lanka was a really interesting thing. We went there and met with the Minister of Mining and Gems, and they're very proud of the fact that they've sort of gone back to a sort of traditional mining model there, that not using mechanized mining, they're trying to manage the resources to benefit the country, the people, and you go, okay, this all sounds really good. And so, like a lot of people, I guess you think of, okay, sapphires from Sri Lanka, and you go, it's sort of it's kind of got this mystical, almost sort of a romantic idea that I'm buying a sapphire from Sri Lanka. And I think for a lot of people, you have that same sense. So then we went to the mines, and we spent a couple days visiting these mines, and you're looking at these 4-meter holes in the ground that are going down anywhere from 50 to 100 meters, and people crawling down these things, all being done by hand. And their solution was that we're going to make this all traditional mining. They've sort of defined, these are the rules by which you have to mine. And you go, well, that all sounds kind of good, except that as soon as you spend any time there, you realize the romance is all gone. I mean, this is hard work, very dangerous work. And then the question is, well, okay, you're not using mechanized mining, and I understand that, except that now you're putting a whole bunch of people into a situation where they're mining in a much more dangerous way than if you did make modern methods available. And this Minister of Mines is sort of going to, well, if someone gets hurt, they get paid this much. If somebody in the family gets killed, they get paid this much. And so they've sort of accepted the fact that this is a dangerous way to mine, but on the other hand, it's a way to manage the resources, they think, to the benefit of the country and keep other large interests out and get as much back as they can. But you're going, is this, in the end, for the people actually doing the mining in the day, is that really the right decision or not? And it's hard to know. And I came out of there realizing that every single sapphire from Sri Lanka I ever see, now I understand everything that went behind getting that one stone here. And oh my gosh, what an amazing story. And the romance is all gone. I mean, there is nothing romantic about that stone coming out of the ground. Anyway.
Thank you, Jeff. And Alan, I'd like to ask you, given that there's these complexities, do consumers or do people in the trade really want to hear how complex this is? Or as Jeff mentioned, it's not as black and white as people would like to have it. Or, it's certified good or bad. How can you or we as educators deal with these issues and kind of try and get people to be more sensitive about the complexity of this?
Well, good morning, everyone. You always give me the horrible question, don't you?
Sorry?
You always give me the horrible question.
Yeah.
I echo the sentiments of all the panel here and all of you what I'm going to say, but going back to Jeff's point, when I first joined the museum 30 years ago, I met a curator there, Max Hay, and he was head of collections. He was probably the brightest man I knew. And I said to him, what's the collecting policy in this museum? And he wrote a paper, and that paper was called Get It and You Keep It. And he didn't care where the stuff came from. He said, I want this, want that, want that. We're going to build the greatest collection. There were no boundaries or anything. Over the years, that changed. We had a registrar system. We had a thing called access and benefit sharing. So it was like, especially in the museum, it's not only mineralogy, gemology, it's also botany, entomology. Pharmaceutical industry had a real problem when we're taking plants out of countries, developing pharmaceuticals from those plants, reaping the benefits for the company, but the country itself wasn't benefit from the indigenous species that lived there. That's an extreme example, but I saw great parallels in gemology. So I used to go out and buy stuff from Afghanistan and Sri Lanka. My registrar would say, well, are we allowed to buy this stuff? Is it legal? Where's it coming from? And I used to say, well, that's a very good question. So I used to ask the questions back to the trade, and I just got a wall of, it's fine. That's all I got. There was no information. Now, when I joined the Gemological Association, students would come to me. They knew nothing about gemology. Many of them knew nothing where the stuff come from. They saw a pretty gem, and they were surprised the stuff came out of the ground. As Bruce says, it was a resource that was disappearing. It didn't grow back like many of the plants or other of the biodiversity. So once it's gone, it's gone. And they started to make choices. They said, well, I don't really want to buy something that's not going back to a community. That is very much a thing that's coming through these days. And so I think for education, what I find there is there's a lot of information out there, but not much facts. And the fact is what people need to understand the problems and make a choice. And we found that at GEMA, most of our students will make a choice based on giving back, acting sustainably, whatever that may mean. And I know that when you say those words, you suddenly, the hairs go back on the back of your head. And sustainability is a very complex subject. How do I get involved? And we come to realize that it's at the very grassroots level of education at the very beginning where we provide the facts, and then people can make choices based on their own judgment. And that will slowly, it's not an overnight thing, that will change the industry. Importantly, a case in point of that, at the GEMA conference last year, we have a raffle. So some of our people from Hatton Garden, they give us specimens, they raffle them off for GEMA. So we did this and we raffled them. Halfway through the evening, we had a look at what was in the pot, and we were going to say, there's £400 in the raffle. And one young student came up to me and said, where does the money go? And I was actually stumped. I sort of said, well, it goes to the running costs of GEMA. And it was very awkward. And I thought, I'm going to make a decision here. So I knew about the hub. And I got up on the microphone and I said, okay, this evening someone asked me where the money is going to. And I'm going to make a decision now that the money raised tonight, it's not much, will go to this sustainable hub, and we will support the Women in Madagascar initiative. And I looked around the room and I was like, oh, wow, fantastic. And then Elaine, my marketing person, came up and said, yes, okay, and we're going to keep the raffle open for the next 20 minutes. After about 20 minutes, we had over £1,500 in the pot, and that was a world record for us. And it opened my eyes. I suddenly thought, there is a want for this. And, we've given someone, this is what we're doing with it. And then in my mind, I said, I don't want this to be seen as a marketing ploy for GEMA, to feel like we're just doing this, so we'd be seen to do the greater good. I really want that to go back and make something that's going to make a difference. And our students, they really wanted that. With the, I don't like to use the term, but the older established part of the gemology industry, it might be a step too far for some people, because they have to make a living. They have their methods, methodology, transparent or not transparent. But the key to this is grassroots level education, transparency, and being bold enough to answer truthfully some of the questions that are raised.
Thank you, Alan. I think that's one of the things we often face, is that people say they want to give back. There's a lot of people in the gem industry that want to give back in meaningful ways, but it's difficult to give back because there's not that link really to where the stones came from. So that's one of the challenges, that we're faced with. And one of the questions that would be, for you in the audience would be, what are the needs of the gem industry to be able to go to that next level? What kind of research, what kind of information do you need? What do retailers need? I'm sure there's jewelry designers also here who are facing these complex questions. And I'd be curious to hear your position on that. Or people like Vincent Pardieu, who's sitting in the back and who's got a lot of experience visiting artisanal mines. And when you see the share of artisanal miners there are in the colored gemstone industry and how complex that is, you start realizing how difficult it is to build a one size fits all solution that would solve all these problems. So I think it's about small projects, it's about information, it's about knowledge. And I'd be interested in hearing some of your perspectives on this and maybe some questions that you would have for the panelists. Anybody? Vincent, you want to share? You don't want to? Because you've already spoken so much about this.
Yeah, well, if you want to know what is going on in the mining area, you just take a plane ticket and you go to see. Not enough people do that. And it's not very difficult. Usually miners are welcoming and they are happy to see people. I never get any problem with miners, only with police usually, but that's the only troublemaker I meet when I go to the field. So usually people are welcoming, even especially in place like Afghanistan and things like that. I was all the time super welcomed by miners everywhere. And, people are speaking about, for example, gemstone from Afghanistan. And is it good to buy a stone from Afghanistan? If you don't buy a stone from Afghanistan, what will be the alternative for the guys in Afghanistan who want to have a legitimate work? Should they go to grow some poppies? Or should they grow to become a Taliban business or something like that? Because if we don't give them, to the small guys, some opportunity for them to make a living, with, for example, gemstones that will make a lady happy on the other side of the world, what are the alternatives for them? Dying, or go to another business that will make them, make a living. But in that case, that will not be a nice business like mining stone to make a lady happy on the other side of the world. So, yeah.
I think clearly the solution is also not to say let's only buy synthetics or let's only buy stones from certain mines or certain countries. So I think part of the storytelling or part of that research also has to be, about showing people how complex these issues are. And that's, much of the work that you do. My question would be, do consumers or do people in the trade really want to accept how complex these issues are? Because they are complex. Anybody with a...
No. I'm not going to answer the question. I actually have another question. I'm a consumer out there. In 5 years, am I going to be able to go into a jewelry store like I can go into Whole Foods and I can go over to the organic section and I know exactly the farm that the food came from. I know the supply chain it came through because it's all written there. And then I know that I'm going to pay 10%, 15% more because it's organic. It's done appropriately. The supply chain is there. But I can then make a right turn and say, I don't really want to pay that 15%. I want to go over here. I'm not sure where it came from. I know it's still broccoli. I know it's still going to taste about the same, but it's not organic. So where does the panel see the future, as well as the group here? Is it enough to be able to educate? Because Whole Foods has done pretty well, and even though it's not doing as well as it did before. It did get bought out by Amazon. But is that kind of where we're looking?
Thank you. Very good question. I think this also kind of poses the question, is certification the solution to all these problems? I'm not saying that education or knowledge is, the way forward. It's one way forward. And having discussions as we are having here are very important for that. And I think it'd be great to hear from our panelists.
I want to say certification isn't just the thing.
Yeah.
Because you can get a certified non-organic and you can get a certified organic.
Mm.
So I'm talking about the whole supply chain
Mm.
and how you identify giving back to the local community in that supply chain and all those things.
Yeah. You want to... Very brief, Vincent, and then we'll give it over to...
Yeah. I think, as you say, you speak about, for example, food and things like that. There is a very strong push by people like fair trade and things like that toward our industry. The problem is our industry is not suitable for that, for one simple reason. Stone are durable. There are many stone in this, in the fair in Tucson that if you want to know who is the miner, probably the miner is dead for maybe 100 years or 200 years or 500 years. So what is okay for coffee, what is okay for banana, is not okay for stone, because stone are durable. And mainly, a lot of gem merchants around the world are not exactly going to search their supply like I do, going to the mine. Actually, they buy from second hand or third hand or 20 hands. So, especially for big stone over 3 carat, many of the stones that are today in the trade are coming from people who passed away a few years ago. So, trace the stone to the miner. What do we have to give? Do we have to leave the list of all the dead people until the miner? We cannot. It's a dream that some people have in their head, that they see maybe gemstone too much like coffee or like banana, but our product is not suitable for that. Maybe for small stone, we need the mine, because you cannot create a parcel with 1,000 stone from second-hand stone. But for the larger stone, most of the stone I see in the trade were not mined during the past few years. So there is a problem with that in the perception, I think, of the public regarding our product. Most of the people in the gem trade are closer to antique dealers than to the job I'm doing.
Thank you for that perspective. Yeah, I'd love to hear, the perspective from our panelists. Jeff, you spoke about Sri Lanka. Obviously, there's a problem with this obsession that people have with traceability, to say that we can trace things from the miner to the end consumer, or even with old gemstones, like Vincent mentioned.
Well, certainly, not an area of my expertise at all, except that, the years that I've been involved in dealing with people who are in the industry and with gems makes me appreciate, we've heard the word complex, and, as Alan pointed out, I've also been questioned. We bring a gem back to the museum, and whether it's a registrar or our director or someone saying, okay, do you know where that stone came from? Is it legal? Is there any issues? And, the words due diligence are the only ones that we can use to sort of cover ourselves. Like say, well, we bought it from a dealer that we trust. We've talked to the dealer. They've told us as much about the stone as they know. But invariably, the chain of information ends at some point. And it may be, well, it's a 20-year-old stone or a 30-year-old stone, or it may be that, yes, it came out of Zambia last year, but we don't know anything more about when, except there are no laws preventing us from buying a gemstone from Zambia, so okay, we're good. And I think, and we have more resources, obviously, and in some ways perhaps more incentive to want to learn that information, because part of what we are is, we want to document our stones, and we're really motivated to learn our information about where they came from. For us, that stone is more valuable if I know the mine it came out of. But the public doesn't have those kind of resources. And so, they're going to be looking at the person that sold it to them and saying, maybe, where did this come from? Maybe not even asking that question. And just even people here who are some of the most knowledgeable in this industry, you ask that question and they can only go back so far. And, and I think it's not because they're trying to hide anything. It's not because they are, aren't smart people. It's just because of all the things we've heard. These stones change hands. They move around quick. They're small things with high value. They move around very easily, very quickly. And it's very difficult to trace that. And we've got, all the issues that people have brought up. And I don't want to say it's impossible, but I do see, I see from our point of view how difficult it is to get that kind of information. And I'd love to hear the ideas or have this whole process start to provide a more transparent, more open way of getting that information. But I have to admit, I'm sort of one of those on the skeptical side. The nature of the world suggests to me, I'm not sure we're ever going to get quite that way in all areas. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but it's always going to be hard to know if you're getting all the right facts back all the way to the point of where that stone originally came from. It's just the nature of the material. Small, highly valuable, it moves around quickly.
Thank you, Jeff. I'd be very interested to hear Bruce's perspective on this, or also the perspective and experience of, your father in mining and dealing and buying. And is traceability something that is it even possible on the ground? I think we also need to remember that most colored gemstones come from very small deposits that are artisanal mining deposits. They're not like a banana plantation, which is constantly there, where you can start a cooperative over 30 years. So we're dealing with very complex and volatile things. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this, Bruce.
Well, if everybody really wants the honest answer to that, it is no. And I don't care what people will try to say. And I hear a lot about blockchain, et cetera, et cetera. And there's multiple reasons for that, some of which Laurent touched upon. If you're dealing in colored gemstones, they're not like diamond. They're not like diamond deposits. They're not like diamond mines. A lot of colored gemstone deposits aren't primary deposits. A lot of, 90, I'm making a number up, but I would say 98, 99% of colored gemstones in the world aren't mined by professional mining organizations. It's artisanal mining. And if you're looking at number, not volume of production. So companies like mine that are larger professional mining organizations mining colored gemstones are extraordinarily rare. You have us, in Africa, I'll focus on Africa for the time being, you have us, and then of course GemFields, but GemFields sources a lot of material outside of their own companies. So then one could say, okay, where does that production come from? If we are looking at blockchain, I hear, blockchain is foolproof. You can't edit the system once it's entered in the system. But keep in mind, that's once the product's entered in the system. So most artisanal mining operations, almost all artisanal mining operations, are not professional organizations. Most of the time you have somebody who actually isn't a professional miner. They're a farmer in the off season. They are mining gemstones. They're very remote locations. Generally, the level of education of these artisanal miners isn't very high. Working conditions are very low. Often you don't have internet connection. There's almost never water, power, electricity, anything there. You're running off of generators, charging your phone off of solar panels, or that you've linked up to a car battery and jerry-rigged a charging system. So with something to that effect, if we're being honest here, no, I don't believe that you're ever going to have a guaranteed system where you can say this stone, and we're talking about the majority of colored gemstones out there. There will obviously be outliers, but where you'll be able to say that this stone was mined by this individual at this location. It was then picked up by this trader on a motorbike, who then took it to the closest village, who then dealt with the village broker, who then jumped on his motorbike and went to a larger neighboring village, who contacted the broker there, who's got a larger network, who then took it to the capital city, who then the guy in the capital city knew a guy in the West or in Asia to call about the stone, who then flew in, and then how did it get out of the country? There are question marks there. Also, if we're also being honest, at least in my neck of the woods, you're dealing in countries that you have a great deal of corruption that is unfortunately endemic in the system and in government in these countries. So if you say, well, all paperwork has to be in order to deal in these gemstones, and you have to have all your export documents, everything lined up in a row, and we make that a must-have on this end, you don't think they're going to figure out a way to get around it over there, and they're going to get a stamp here and a stamp there where they need to, and some money's going to exchange hands? That's what's going to happen, guys. I mean, all you can do, best case scenario, is that you trust the people that you deal with, you trust that they trust who they're dealing with, and it's really a trust system. I don't think that there's anything that you can mechanically institutionalized that is going to guarantee that these goods were legally, ethically mined from this location, and that is a stamp of origin on it. And you can come up with every system that I've seen, blockchain, et cetera, and there's going to be a way around it. And in those neck of the woods, in my neck of the woods, they are very good about getting around things. And I also think on my front as a professional miner, in Eastern Africa at least, you're going to see fewer and fewer companies such as myself because the government's making it very, very difficult to do business. So I don't want to be gloom and doom. And to end more on a bright note, at least on my talk, would be you have to trust who you're dealing with. You have to know who you're dealing with. And it's at the end of the day, as it has been for thousands of years in this business, it's relationships and trusting those relationships.
Thank you, Bruce. Yeah, I think that's important to note that there is already a lot of trust and things that work well in the industry, and it's been around for a very long time. And, you know, blockchain may be one solution, but there's many solutions out there. And I think anybody that's trying to just force or propose one solution, the industry being so diverse, I think there's room for several models on this. I think Doug wanted to add something, and then...
I think it's important for us to maybe... It's been a challenge for me because so much of our work in this area has to do with traceability. And aside from the fact that, you know, Burmese rubies are exquisite materials, cashmere sapphires, things like that, do we really care where they came from? I mean, the reason we care where they came from is because there's some kind of negative associated with the locale that they came from. And I think we spend a lot of time trying to figure out where these things came from and not enough time thinking about what do we do to fix the negative things that are happening where these things come from. You know, and Vincent, I've spent time in country, certainly not as much as you, and you take a look at some of the conditions and you say, boy, it's really hard working in these mines, and it's a, you know, young... what is a young worker? Is a young worker in Chicago the same thing as in Tanzania? I don't think so. But it's very difficult to say, yeah, the working conditions are terrible and they're tough and they're unsafe, but the only other option is death. I'm not sure that justifies saying that you have a garbage life, but at least you have a life. And I also don't think that we can change the world. But if we really want to say, we're never going to be able to have traceability, 100% traceability, not in our industry. It just can't happen. But what we can do is we can say we're continually working to do and to make certain that the colored gemstone industry is improving conditions in the countries where these things come from. We will never fix everything. We'll never get rid of corruption, I don't think. And I'm talking about Washington, D.C. I'm not talking about Kenya. But I mean, I think we have to start focusing beyond, if we can tell where this thing came from, all our problems are over with, because that's not the case. It's not traceability, it's sustainability. And it's about sustaining our industry. We have to make certain that we start putting back into these countries and developing value-added economies and helping these countries improve, because their governments may not, but we can.
Thank you. I think that's very helpful kind of reframing of the conversation, because that was ultimately also the motivation for this discussion, was how can we constructively move towards sustainable development? So contributing to poverty alleviation in some of those countries and lowering the impact of gemstone mining and things like that. Do you want to add?
I'd like to go back to the gentleman that asked the question earlier about Whole Foods. Somewhere in the Rainbow exists only for the last 10 years. For those of you who don't know us, we are a fairly new collection and educator in the world of gems and jewelry. And I'd like to say that, I don't mind having this guy sitting next to me because I like competing with him.
Oh, more than welcome to add something. Yeah, I think
just not on that grand scale. Actually, I'd like to move in with him is what I'd like to do. Anyway, we have, I meant at the museum.
That gemstones need to.
Oh my gosh. All right, let's have a little humor thrown in there.
I'm going to leave.
Anyway, we have about 600 pieces on exhibit right now at the Flandreau Planetarium here in Tucson. And I can tell you in the last 10 years, I've actually had my hands on every acquisition of every gemstone that comes into our collection. And when that happens, I ask a lot of questions because I've built an amazing team around me. And I think that that is a main goal for myself. I think that even going into the public sector, if you're a jeweler, the one thing that you cannot replace is building trust amongst yourself to your client, from a broker to me. I will tell you, for Somewhere in the Rainbow, if I'm purchasing Savorite garnet, I'm purchasing Savorite garnet from Bridges Savorite. And the reason for that is not necessarily because I know anybody there at the mine, but I trust the relationship that I have here in the United States with the mine owner. Okay, so with that being said, going back to the question, or going back to the comment of I'm at Whole Foods and I've got a choice between organic and paying more or broccoli that's just broccoli. The fact of the matter is 10 years ago, Whole Foods didn't exist, so you didn't have a choice. It has to start somewhere. And for us at Somewhere in the Rainbow, I can speak to the fact that we find it as important now as we did 10 years ago when we started, and we'll continue on to build the relationships, the trust with people who are transparent to us as they can possibly be. And if you own a jewelry store, that's what your clients are asking from you as well. Be as transparent as you can possibly be. It has to start somewhere.
Thank you, Shelley. Just have two questions here.
Of course, good morning. I'm part of the product team from GemHub's. So I just wanted to give the view from GemHub's perspective in terms of sustainability and transparency as well as the traceability of the gemstones, because they're all topics that they go very much hand in hand. In terms of traceability of the stones, it's something that we are looked at very much, and the trade ask the final clients, they come to us and ask very often for what can we give to support the supply chain of the stones. And in partnership with the Gubelin lab, then we are testing on the emeralds that come out of our Kagem mine, a special technique of nanoparticles that include basically all the details of where the emeralds come from. And this is something that's not exclusive to GemHub's, so all the miners can work with Gubelin and do this technique. And this gives very good information to the clients and to the new owners of the stones. So that's a good step forward. It's very complicated, but at least it adds something to the question to supply chain. As for sustainability, as you may all know, GemHub's is very active in giving back to the country where we operate. And part of this, maybe it's also the fact that in some auction we have introduced some mined gemstones outside of our own production, purely to support the individual miners as well, because that's also part of our support to the country alongside building school and all of that. So it's actually a very complex subject, and it seems like everybody does a lot, but it's never enough. So I'm sure that, it's interesting to hear everybody's point of view, and thanks.
Yeah, I think traceability is one thing. The other thing is, how does traceability actually contribute to sustainable development? And that was part of Doug's point also, is how can we give back? Traceability is a good thing in itself, but we need to go that further step where people want to give back. And that can be a challenge, I think, for retailers, for jewelry designers, or for people sourcing stones. There was a question here and then there.
Oh, well, good morning, everybody. I'm probably the youngest sitting here, and please forgive me if I say anything wrong. My question is not regarding anything high-end gem pieces, luxury pieces. My question is regarding the common, the majority of the industry which works on commercial retail, which works with the mid-income group, whose buyers are mid-income groups. The question is, like, before people, my question just came from the retailers. Okay, I'm doing the research, and before, like, girls used to come to the store, they used to ask them, like, I want a green color bracelet, I want a blue color bracelet. They did not know about the stones, they did not know about the gemstones. They just know about the colors. So before 10 years, they used to have natural stones. Now the place has been taken by synthetic stones. So that grade of, like the mid commercial quality gemstones, I mean, do you think that the future is good for them? Because synthetic stones and CZs are taking place of them. And I've seen stock of around 100 jewelers around Miami or over Alaska that people are, they are reducing their natural stone inventory. Like in the commercial sector, which moves fast, what we say, like fast moving jewelry. I mean, what is the answer to that? Like sustainable future? Because obviously the gem quality stones are obvious first choice for the private customers and high-end jewelry. But what about the rest of the goods? Do they have any future? I mean, the market moves on the basis of them. In auctions, high-end sells the first. But what about the rest?
Thank you. I think that poses a very interesting question, as we talk a lot about large stones, $100,000 stones that can be traced in all this. But what about $10 bead necklaces, even with natural stones? And that's a huge challenge if you walk around the Tucson Gem Show, and it's even a greater headache than these single stones. I don't know if any of our panelists have
it's also marketing as well. It's marketing of that material. Well, that's where it comes down to. If your client said, "Oh, we've got you a nice synthetic blue bracelet," you're going to really enjoy this. And then someone will come along and say, "Well, you've got a beautiful, romantic, natural stones from Sri Lanka that were mined, as Jeff said, romantically. They formed 400 million years ago." It's a choice thing, isn't it, as well? And I think that's the problem as well. Once you get information out there, then the people can make more of a choice. Going back, I think Doug's hitting the nail on the head, though, his comment as well on that, is that we overthink stuff. We do tend to overthink stuff. And I know that when there was a news item on the BBC about the sapphire mine in Madagascar, and they had all these artisanal miners who were on camera just for 2 seconds say, "Oh, so-and-so, this is a week's, he just found a tiny rolled sapphire, which is a week's food for his family." Then I walk around the show and I see, 5,000-10,000 a carat for this material. And the choice thing comes in then. Like, what is the choice? There isn't a choice at the moment. I'll buy it for 5,000 or 10,000 there a carat, but if I buy it for 15,000 a carat there, will the extra 5,000 go back to that community and build infrastructure and roads for the whole community and let that miner have a better life? That is the nub of the problem. And of course, when the sustainable resource is gone, then what? Then the rise of synthetics will come out, and that natural material will get even more valuable. And so I think that is a real problem for us. And I'm really interested in that you said that, because I always thought that we will come to a tipping point, where the whole thing will implode. And going back to Gemfields, I know you have your massive arm of corporate social responsibility, but there's what's the individual's social responsibility? And that's where the younger consumers are thinking of. They want to give back, but they want to know that it actually goes back and not in the coffers of someone who's got a very nice house and a very nice life at the detriment of those people working all day. And I don't want to harp on too much because I can do this, but that whole thing about the BBC was 2 minutes about the people, and it was 20 minutes on the biodiversity loss for that area. And they were going on about the swathe of forest that was disappearing meant that the two lemur populations on either side of that couldn't communicate, and with that they couldn't mate and make more lemurs. So the population was just diving like this, and that was of more concern to the news than the actual people. So I think that's a very interesting point to make.
Okay. I just have a question here. Maybe you could present yourself and also talk about the Colombian case study, where Colombia has gone from being a mining country to also cutting much more stones, or even now making jewelry. So I think that's a good example also of sustainable development, that there's more value staying in the country. And maybe you can share some of your ideas on that.
Thank you, Lauren. Basically, we are from the Colombian Emerald Sports, and Oscar here is from the Federation. And that's something very interesting, because some of you may be questioning what to do, where we start, right? So we do have what you call complex problem because Colombia inherited in the 60s. I mean, we get the private mining of emeralds about 70s, 74 exactly, the year I born. And at that time and after, we have several civil wars. We have, all these drug-related problems, all these. And the area that was, the emerald area, was a place that where every single people escape from violence and get in there. And then you have the coincidence or whatever that the people start using open pits, so it was easy to get emeralds. So it was very easy. So you grow up all this population, and sooner or later, these things deplete. And then when we were late 90s, we already passed some of the worst area of Escobar and some of those big cartels. And we start having the idea what we can do. And we have all this population. So we create a law, national law, that help to keep some of those money that we do in the export, in the trade. And we keep this money so we can invest back in communities. And that's been very good because we've been doing 20 years, all these things. So we have a lot of investment in education, health, development. We've been doing a lot of that. We create a laboratory to support our industry. We do promotion, but still, then you face new challenge when you see the reality, because whatever you can cover with that is never enough. We will never know. So, and you have a new reality now in the 2000s. We have this reality that you have the environment problems and you have all those things. What we now develop from the last 5-10 years, we develop a strong environment policies. So when you do mining, no matter who you are, small, traditional, or largest, you gotta care about the environment, and that will make it very strong. We also create traceability. And this is kind of new. The traceability is kind of very new. It's like only 4 or 5 years old. So we give traceability even to the small miner. Even the traditional miner can have a traceability. So we incorporate them in the taxation, in the financial system, because in some way, all these problems before leave the emerald industry like in an island, it was a Hong Kong kind of like a free zone trade. But in fact, that's something good in Colombia is we have a lower taxation for emeralds. So we only need to pay 2.5% for the export. So it's kind of low. So now you have all these problems, environment problems, traceability problems. So we develop a law that even the smaller miner, they can do it. The artisanal miner, they can apply for that. They can also apply for the traders, for the dealers. So everybody, if they want to be formal, because this is a key thing here, is why we all develop this. We have a huge stigma in the world that all our business, Colombian, belong to drugs in some way. So it is true, man. And then we're really doing big advance in the country. We are getting into the OCDA. We are getting all those things. So we develop this traceability so we can be sure people that they do the mining, artisanal mining, they can pay their small taxes. They can do the whole thing. They can give the origin certificate. This is a legal document that we have inside the country. So it means this one, they legally get it, and they legally pay, are in the structure. They give to the dealer give to the exporter. All goes well. And this is another thing. I don't know what will be the outcome, but we already defend. And now privately, ourselves inside, we are trying to have the appellation of origin. So the appellation of origin is like a key, like a support for all these miners that are traditional, because if they do the right things, they pay the small taxes they need to pay, they are in the financial system, they do the certificate of origin, they can appeal of us, and we will add something about the enhancements. So we will do something about the enhancements, the disclosure of enhancement, so they can have the appellation of origin. This is a Colombian emerald. So we don't know where this one end up, but just telling you, like, being 20 years facing all these problems, we create this fund with a 1%. We create all these traceability tools. And I hope this maybe gives some ideas of what we can do around the world, because I feel like that.
I think that's kind of the take-home message. Somebody talked, I think it was Bruce, about governments. This is one government. There are, in the gem industry, we're sourcing from over 50 countries. So there's 50 different governments and 50 different ways of thinking on that. So that's also one of the challenges that we face, is there's different legislation and there's not one model for it all. So it's interesting to see that too. maybe. I'd like to also focus, if you can keep your questions or comments very brief, because we're nearly coming to the end. And if you can focus also on the needs or things that you find would be important so that we can move things to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Robert Gessner, ex-Tanzanite 1 geologist and Gemfield geologist, and been independent now for the last 2 years. And I think over the last 2 years, for me, networking our industry, having an African perspective as well, I think over the last 2 years, the discussions have been about the general topic. It's still going about the general topic and where are the solutions, where are we going? And I think my comment to it is every different country, as you've just said, has a different set of history, current situations. I think geology and the deposits, as Bruce alluded to, plays a bigger part in terms of understanding the geology, mining, the resources, which could be added to the greater group. However, for solutions, I think we can't make the whole world, how is it sustainable, how is it traceable, how is it responsible. It should be broken down to country, a case study per country, and then education. Every country will have its geology, every country will have its conditions, every country has its history, but if you provide the consumer with as much knowledge as possible per case study, which is provided, if you want demantoid from Namibia, you've got someone who's mining it directly from the source. You want savarite from East Africa, you know where it is. If you provide all that information from whether it's route to market, whether it's traceability, what's going on, we will start providing the consumer with a lot more information. And that's my summary and thought on it.
It's very good. It's something that we often face is that people think that all gemstones are mined alike. All gemstones go through the same treatment process, same cutting process, come from the same types of countries. And it's not that. It's much more complex. Take a question, very brief question or comment, Ed, and then we'll move back to the panel.
A very brief comment. Edward Johnson from RJC, Responsible Jewellery Council. Robbie said something interesting there about solutions. From my perspective and from our perspective, forgive me, my colleague Anne-Marie is here with me, and sorry we weren't here at the beginning of the conversation. We had another meeting. Simply put, it's about working together with bodies that are really trying to be the buffer between civil society and NGOs, the consumer, and the trade and the amazing experience that many people in this room have of doing business over sometimes generations. So I just wanted to make the quick comment from our perspective at RJC that we are working hard to bring coloured stones into RJC's code of practice. And we're here to invite members of the coloured stone industry to engage with us in this so that we can do it together as an industry. That's my comment.
Thanks. And maybe, I don't know if the panel have any concluding thoughts on these things. I think we've realized from the discussion that it's very complex. We sometimes talk a lot about traceability, but the aim should really be about how do we give something back. And there's a nice little analogy from the Urban Dictionary on what sustainable development is, and I talked to Ed about this yesterday, is when you take a cold beer out of the fridge, make sure to put one back. Now, we can't put the gemstones back into the fridge, but I think we need to try and make sure that more goes back into the communities, into the environment, and into developing the places where these gemstones are mined and traded. And these are very complex issues. And I think it's not enough to just say it's complex and there's not much we can do about it and always have these discussions and then realize what's the conclusion. We need to move forward on this. So I would invite you all to try and connect with the Gemstone Knowledge Hub if you have things, as Robert said, projects where you feel it'd be important to study a certain type of gemstone, or if you have questions for certain types of supply chain where we could collaborate. Do research on that, work with people, have this transparently published. I would welcome you to connect with us. And I'd like to ask maybe our panelists if you have some final thoughts, perhaps a little constructive and optimistic on where things could go from here or what the vision for the gem industry is. Because I think there are, as you all mentioned, a lot of beautiful stories in this gem industry. And the gem industry has been around for millennia. It's very linked to emotion, to storytelling, as is, museums and also collections kind of show. What thoughts, what final remarks would you have on this? Maybe Shelley, you can.
Wow, I didn't want to go first on this. So you're good. One of the things that I just said to Dr. Post is the fact that there's a lot of passion sitting in this room about this particular subject. And for me, as the curator of an amazing gem collection, I can tell you that everything that I do based on relationships, based on trust, based on knowledge, and I don't necessarily always rely on my knowledge. I rely on the knowledge of the dealer. I rely on the knowledge of the cutter. I rely on the knowledge of every person in that team before a gemstone comes into my collection. And with that being said, I guess for me, the end result is if it's beautiful and you love it, it doesn't really matter where it comes from. I don't own just cashmere sapphires in my collection, although I wouldn't mind having a couple more. But if it's beautiful and you love it, the number one, you should buy it, or if you're the seller, you should sell it. But you should also at least take the due diligence to have relationships that are trusting, and to take that knowledge back to your client and allow them to instill that trust back into your store or into a dealer, whatever. I don't know what goes on at a mine because I'm not there, but what comes out of that mine and the people that I trust coming up through that chain, that's where I make my buying decisions. That's the best that I can say for now.
Okay, Alan?
I'll start with a funny story.
Okay.
When I put the Vault exhibition in the museum together, I found a fantastic spinel in the collection. The label said, looted from the Chinese Summer Palace when it was burned down by the British in 1862. Great. That was a point in case. But what I did was I sent it to our marketing department and say, this is the label for the Vault. Are you happy? Knowing that we're calling it absolute furore in the museum. But I said, we have to be honest about this. We really have to be honest. So we reworded it. In times of war, it was routinely known that things were looted from countries. And that was it. There was not one person from the general public complained about it. So it is perception as well. We must be very honest with ourselves. At GemA, we're rewriting the sustainability chapter in our course notes. And I've read the notes and I just put my hand in my head thinking, how are we going to do this? So my sort of plea is I'm going to be asking many of you and the Knowledge Hub, because I think knowledge is where we need to be, is to look at that and be honest with ourselves and give our consumer, which will be our young students ultimately, who will go out there and spread the word, that we'll have a slow burning change for the industry over the next 5 to 10 years at least. But that is key, knowledge and transparency. Don't be afraid to tackle the tricky subjects, but realize that we cannot change the world overnight like we wish we could.
Okay. Bruce?
I'll keep it a little more general than that. So I think as human beings, inherently human beings want to do the right thing, and they want things to be better in this world. And I think that just in the world in general, it can be a very dark place. However, as Shelley also said, there's a lot of passion in this room. There's a lot of beauty in our industry. And I think really shining a light on that beauty will inspire and kindle that spark in all of us that want to do better for this world. And I think that's really the only way together, or working together towards the better good, that we will see improvement. And I think that there are a great many intricate details to work out throughout the world, and not just our industry, but every industry. And I think really the thing for us to do is not to look at the negatives in this industry, but rather be aware of them and shine a light on the good in this industry in order to inspire more good to come forth. And that would be my summary.
Thank you, Bruce. Maybe Jeff, some final words.
Final words. Okay. I guess a couple thoughts. One is, I think when I first got started even hearing about this, talk about, my first question was, what is sustainability? And I think that's a hard concept. It's sort of a nice general term, but I think it means a little something different to us in different situations. And I think part of the problem with this whole issue is that for any of us individually or any particular jeweler, you don't quite know what to do. What is and this is where I think leadership is going to be the important thing. And I think GemHub, I think it's Responsible Jewelers, I think it's GemA, I think it's AGTA. If there is some leadership that can sort of provide the definition of sustainability, can perhaps identify some particular actions that the industry could get behind and then see a positive result, that I think perhaps provides a path forward. You'd like to see you just do something and see something positive come out of it. You go, okay, that worked. But me as an individual, or I think most of us separately in this room, aren't going to know what it is we can do. And that's where I think the leadership, if there are people that who really, can study this, come back to the industry and say, here are a couple of things we can do. And maybe then that inspires the leadership to assemble some resources, members, perhaps part of their dues, part of every sale, something goes to a fund that now can be provided for these specific projects that people who have made the effort to think about can say, you know what, if we have some funds, we can work with this group, and you do it one at a time. You can't solve all the problems, but I think a little bit of success then breeds more success, and it doesn't seem so overwhelming. I mean, right now, I heard the word complex about 100 times, and I heard, sustainability almost as many, and I'm not quite sure any of those helped us a whole lot. But I think if there are a few projects that, if every year, GemA, AGTA, all these could come back and say, this is what we did last year. And then you kind of go, wow, we did something. Well, that's okay. I feel a little better about that. I'll pull $5 out of my pocket, give you another $5 and say, okay, do it again next year. And that's where I think that kind of leadership and then reporting back starts to give us some sense of hope that there are some paths that we can follow where we can all feel kind of good that maybe we're making a difference. And you don't have to solve all the world's problems, but if you've made a few people's lives better here, I start to feel better, and it gives me the incentive to want to now make the next group of people's lives a little bit better. And maybe that inspires the creativity that helps us all think of now, how can we all help you do that in even a better way?
Thank you.
Leadership, I think, is what we really need from those of you who are really thinking about this to tell us, how can we help you make this actually happen?
Thank you very much. Those are valuable final comments. I think it's about bringing it back to concrete things. And so if you have concrete suggestions for how we can move forward, please feel free to connect. And I share your feeling that we've talked a lot about complexity and sustainability. There's another word that we haven't used so much and that I think describes it much better. This is a journey. It's a journey. It's not going to be solved tomorrow. It's a journey that's going to go on for a long time and that has been going on for a long time. And we should just keep on moving forward in that journey. And that takes away some of the pressure from wanting to solve everything at one event like this. So thank you all for being present. And thank you to our panelists also for making time to come here. And feel free to connect. Thank you.